Hello again, I'm Stephen Wells, the host of the Motoring Weekly podcast for the Australian Historic Road and Racing community. This is episode 187. It's time for the last podcast of the year, and this one is with a fellow that I've known for many years. And this year I've been shining a spotlight on the Australian Motor Heritage Foundation, and I've been learning about the collections of magazines, books, audio and video that they curate and provide for research and review. So my last interview with the volunteers of the foundation is with Peter Eppel, who is focused on the books held by the foundation. I first met Peter some years ago as part of the motoring group inside the Royal Automobile Club of Australia, and he has great tastes in cars, having owned a number of important British sports cars and some quirky French utility vehicles. Peter is also a member of the Historic Sports and Racing Car Association, who organise several race meetings a year. And I spoke with Peter about his volunteer work at the foundation. This morning I am talking with Peter Eppel. I haven't seen Peter for a number of years. I've known him through a number of other car clubs and motoring organisations over the years, so it's nice to catch up with you again, Peter.
Thank you.
And first question for you is, we're here at the Australian Motor Heritage Foundation. What was your background in motorsport and how did you get involved?
Well, I suppose how I became a motor racing enthusiast, as a boy, I think kids are born with the motoring gene. I remember tugging at my mother's skirts whenever an exotic-looking car went past, and I said, "Oh, Mummy, what sort of car is that?" And she'd invariably say MG. She was probably right in those days, but yes. And later on, as a young teenager, I used to go to the local library after school, probably to meet girls, but you have actually got to pick up a book. And mainly I was reading adventure books like Thor Heyerdahl's Patiki expedition and so on. And sort of one day I picked up a motor racing book, and in it was Dennis Jenkinson's famous account of the 1955 Mille Miglia, where he shared the Mercedes with Sterling Moss for the 1,000-mile race around Italy on public roads, and they're doing 180 miles an hour on the long straights and so on. And it's an absolute jaw-dropping account. And I go, wow, gosh, nothing like this happens in Eastwood, that's for sure. And so after that, I decided to take much more interest in motor racing. And of course, that mid-60s period coincided with the golden age of motor racing in Australia, with the Tasman series, when we had the very best of the European and international Grand Prix drivers visiting our local circuits for the Tasman series. And of course it was very accessible, because at Warwick Farm, as a young lad, you could, for $1 return on the train, you could get out to Warwick Farm, whereas for a kid these days to get out to Eastern Creek or previous to that Amaroo or Oran Park would have been extremely difficult without a car. Whereas the railway made Warwick Farm very accessible, and we saw, truly a golden age of motor racing there. And of course, that period coincided and of course, motor racing in those days was extremely glamorous. We saw that in the movies at the time, and the cars and the people and the whole European scene. And of course, the most exciting mark I found at the time was Lotus, because they're such a tremendous story of humble beginnings, and within relatively short period of time went on to be the most famous motor racing and successful racing car builders. And not only built that, they built these really exciting road cars. So more than any other mark, I've been a Lotus man now for, over 50 years, ever since a teenager. And I've owned 4 Lotuses, and still own one, a Europa twin cam. And of course, after I left school and started work, I had this absolute burning desire to go motor racing, but I had no money, of course. And so, with the absolutely huge energy and can-do-anything attitude of youth, I managed to build a very modest clubman in a carport at home, working out there all hours of the day and night in the freezing cold, and it was road registered, and I drove it everywhere and ran lots of hill climbs and races at Amaroo, Oran Park. Did the 6-hour relay race 5 times at Amaroo, which was a fantastic race because one, you're tossed in with all sorts of other cars, sports sedans and touring cars and sports cars, production sports cars, and you get to do lots of laps, basically a full tank of fuel, 40 or 50 laps at a time, just reeling them off. And so that was just such a wonderful experience. And hill climbs. In those days there were so many hill climbs around Sydney. Silverdale, Dapto, Bathurst Hill Climb, what have I missed? Great days.
Well, the funny thing is I actually saw a bit of footage yesterday of the Bathurst Hill Climb, and I didn't know that there was a hill climb using part of the circuit at Bathurst. But you've mentioned a couple of other, Silverdale and places like that. Those have been lost in the midst of time now, haven't they?
Yes, very much so. Yes, the interesting thing about Bathurst, because it runs in the reverse direction to the racing, it starts at the top of the straight, just outside the Bathurst Car Club premises, and then goes up to the top of the mountain where it levels off. And it's such a steep hill, of course, you're pretty much flat out in any sort of car of modest horsepower. If you've got 400 horsepower, you might have to back off, but in anything modest, it's pretty much flat out all the way. But one of my most memorable experiences being there is one year when I ran there, John Dawson Damer had his Lotus 49 there, and Alex MacArthur had his Brabham Formula 1 car, I'm not sure which model it was, both with Cosworth DFV engines. And anyway, we'd all have our runs up to the top of the hill, and they'd put 20 cars up the hill, then we'd all sort of park there and sit on the fence while the other runs finished, and then we'd all jump back in our cars and all come back together back down the hill. I remember driving back down my clubman, looking in the rear vision mirror, and I've got a Lotus 49 and a Brabham Formula 1 car in my rear vision mirror, and that's a pretty unusual sight.
Yep. One of the things you also spoke about was Warwick Farm, and in this series of interviews with people from the Motor Heritage Foundation, Warwick Farm is quite clearly a venue that impacted virtually every volunteer I've met here at the foundation. Describe, you said it was easy to get on the train to go and watch the racing. What was Warwick Farm like for you?
Yeah, well, it sort of did very much encapsulate that whole glamorous period. It had being at a permanent facility, horse racing facility. It had nice grandstands, nice gardens, nice lawns, and that sort of thing. And I think, as Frank Matich said at the time, it was the sort of place where you could invite your bank manager to, whereas by comparison, Oran Park and Amaroo were just sort of country racetracks, really, and so on. And of course, so we'd arrive there, we'd watch, and I think it was about 2.25 miles around, if memory serves me correctly. We'd sort of start watching the first couple of races up near the top of the circuit, near the pit straight, then gradually move clockwise around the circuit, down onto Hume Straight, down to Creek Corner, which was probably one of the most exciting places to watch because it's at the end of a very long straight where an open wheel is probably doing 150 miles an hour and into basically a U-turn sort of thing. And then over near the Esses, you could walk across to the Esses where the Shell Bridge was, and you could stand on the Shell Bridge on the inside of the circuit, watching the cars on a very tight line, drifting very much through that corner. I mean, Kevin Bartlett in the GTV type Alfa Romeo drifting through that corner was just and he's only wouldn't even be 2 meters from you while he's doing it, and and then of course you keep working for the rest of the day, work your way around the circuit, and then late in the day end up back at the pits or the paddock where you could walk through, now have access to it and walk through and have a very close look at the racing cars.
Yes. Yeah. And so you've had a long passion for motorsport and Lotus along the way. What brought you to the foundation, and why did you see how did you see the value in what they were doing?
Okay. I was invited out by Brian Caldersmith, who's one of our directors and a very long-standing friend from the Lotus Club, and I came out and had a look, and I was very impressed by what they've done here, and I said, yes, okay, once I get retire, I'll be happy to be involved, and so on, because, you know, it's Hugh King's vision as our chairman, and it's really fantastic what he's done. And Hugh King invited me to head Curator. I don't think I'm particularly well qualified for that, apart from a lifetime of reading car magazines, and so on. And we're gradually turning it into a very orderly collection of stuff, much of which is from Hugh's personal donation of his very extensive library of some very valuable books, some very good, very early books, and yeah, so it is a fantastic record of the motor century, not just in a car or automotive sense, but also the social history of Australia. And yeah, and in that respect it's very important. And from a technical point of view, we have workshop manuals of going back to the various early days and so on, which will help maintain these vehicles into the future. Yeah.
And one of the things that did surprise me when I started to get really aware of the work that you're doing is the age and when things really kicked off here. So I wasn't aware that you had documentation back to the early 1900s. So you've got a whole series, a library of books now. How far back does that go back to the 1900s, or?
Oh, very much so. We've sort of we've got one section, the Australian section, or more what you might call a travel section, I suppose. Books written by the pioneer motorists like Francis Birtles, who's, you know, an amazing Australian motoring pioneer, who he crisscrossed Australia twice, east to west. West to east, sorry, and then north to south on a bicycle, for heaven's sake. It must have been awfully fit. And then, of course, once cars started to arrive, he repeated the journeys in cars. And then, of course, he did his very famous journey from London to Melbourne in about 1928 in the Beam motor car, a journey which the cartoonist Warren Brown has just reenacted in a similar bean, and so we have books from that era, you know, where any journey in a motor car was an adventure, whether it's across Australia, Europe, Africa. They were just amazing tales, you know, that when some of these people ventured from where then there was no roads. And in fact, something we got donated a little while ago was a collection from, I think it's a descendant of Herbert Thompson, who built one of the first cars in Australia in about 1896, the Thompson steam car. Built it in Melbourne, brought it up to Sydney on the boat for display at the Sydney Royal Easter Show, where it was attracted great interest. And it was always their intention to drive back to Melbourne, and this is in about 1900. And but the Bathurst show said, "Oh, can you bring it up to Bathurst for our show?" So they popped it on the train, brought it up to Bathurst, and it was on display there. So I said, "Oh, well, we'll just drive back from Bathurst." You know, it's similar to driving back from Sydney. And of course, so they set off, and it took about 8 days. It took them the first day, because the road's virtually non-existent. It took them the first day to get to Blaney. Well, we'd do that in about 15 minutes these days. And of course they had to chop wood for the boiler and camp out and all that sort of thing, and ford creeks and so on and so forth. So we inherited this whole box of beautiful black and white photographs of this car, the people associated with it standing there in their frock coats and top hats, and then a little book that they published afterwards. It's about A5 size, probably only 20 pages or so, and it's the account of this journey from Bathurst to Melbourne, and fantastic reading, and they are real treasures. That's from 1900, a piece of Australian history.
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't realise, that there was somebody here who had invented a car, developed a local car, only a few years after Benz had released his car. And I found that, you know, those snippets of information are absolutely fascinating about this country, that, you know, probably not many people know that there was a man in Melbourne who locally designed, built, and then sold some of these vehicles at a time when it was still a very, very early industry anywhere else in the world.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, in the early days, we had so much industry here, building tractors, motorbikes, cars, and so on, and agricultural machinery and all of that. And of course, well, we've let all that go, haven't we, in the name of economic rationalism?
Yes.
But
So
don't get me started.
Yeah. So the book collection here, how big is it?
In terms of number of books?
Yeah, number of books.
Gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
a lot. In fact, till I started here, I had no idea that there'd been so many books written about motor cars.
Right. Yeah.
And I must say, not all of them should have been written. I mean, there's all the sort of those sort of picture books
Yes.
that get compiled from a photo library and come out on the Christmas sale list
That's
at
right.
1995.
Yes.
Yes.
And so you've working in the collection, you're sorting it into different subsections to be able to understand what you've got?
Yes, we are. I'll verbally walk you through room by room. In the what was the Ron Tornac room, we have biographies, all in alphabetical order, starting from probably who'd be the first, Abacassis, I suppose, who designed the Mini,
Yep.
all the way through to Z, which would be Count Zaborowski, if I've said that right, who built Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yes.
And everybody in between. And then we've got Marx, starting with, Abarth, probably, through AC,
Good.
through to Z, which of course would be Zagato, and so on. Then there's a lot of, some books are very hard to categorise, and you've got to put them in general and that. But we have a whole Australian section,
Yep.
Australian motorsport, Australian clubs, Australian journeys on the road, Australian industry, history of sort of motoring general in Australia, and so on. And then there's a whole motorsport section, which is very big, and again from the earliest days of motor racing, because let's face it, motorsport started when the second car was built.
Yes.
And they met at the traffic lights, except there weren't traffic lights yet. They were sometime in the future. And yes, from the earliest days, and so on. So we have everything from the early days of Grand Prix racing through to the modern era of Formula One, which started with the World Championship in 1951. And then, of course, sports car racing, a whole section on circuits. Again, we do everything in alphabetical order, starting from A for Aintree, Z for Zandvoort,
Yes.
and so on. And then, did I say a section on rallying? And then one of the more interesting techniques is we have a whole lot of books on driving technique, how to drive,
Okay.
which is perhaps more people should read. And one of the most I find the most fascinating is one from about 1909, and it's a book on how to teach yourself to drive. Because let's face it, in 1909, there's not many people you can ask. You're not going to ask your next door neighbour to teach you to drive. So few people, so you had to learn from a book in those days. Good luck to you. And then there's a whole range of other books, particularly on motorsport driving, which we all grew up, and I read them all before I started racing. Paul Frere's book and Tartufi, and the most, probably most important was Dennis Jenkinson's book called The Racing Driver, which very much dealt with the mental aspects of driving fast.
Which is fascinating, you know, when the people were writing those books, you know, it was still a developing sport in its maturity, so people were getting a lot of this information down. And you're holding a lot of books that are hugely valuable and probably quite rare.
Yes, certainly, yeah. Some would be very rare,
And do you see the books being utilised for researchers, and if you've catalogued them, they can then come in and say, well, I'd like to know a bit about a particular circuit here or overseas, or looking at a particular race meeting? How do you see the content that you've got here being utilised by people?
Well, I'm not so sort of knowledgeable on that, but I know it is our sort of goal to get a lot of this, you know, everyone accesses things on the internet now, and we get it all on the cloud, you know.
Yes.
And that's, the digital process is sort of an ongoing sort of intention.
Yes. Because you've got so much information here. You know, you've got the books, you've got audio visual, you've got the race results, you know, stuff about motorcycles, speedway, a range of different things. This is becoming the premier repository for what's happened in the Australian environment as far as the internal combustion engine.
Well, that's correct. Yes, it is a really important repository of information, and as to what use will be made in the future, as well, we can't foretell that. But my dad was a bit of a collector of stuff, and my mother would sometimes urge him to get rid of stuff, and Dad would always reply, well, gosh, how would we ever know anything about the Romans if they'd thrown everything out? Well, I can tell you, people are going to know a lot about the automotive century.
Isn't that why we had the Dark Ages? Because people threw it out.
Yes, they burned all the books, and so on.
And your role is what here?
Well, Hugh King has appointed me as head curator.
Right.
Yes.
So, and what does that do? Does that mean that you have an oversee on all of the different subsections of the collection?
I try to, yes. Yeah. I mean, the magazine team are doing a great job of. David Barrett's doing a great job of that, yes, of making sense of all the magazines, so on. Particularly we've got a lot of very early Australian magazines that go back, and the more recent publications.
Yes, and one of the regular comments I've heard as well is that there's a need to have more volunteers here to help you guys with the incredible amount of documents and books that need to be curated. How would somebody get in touch with the foundation if they had an urge to come and provide some time?
Well, probably our website's best, and then there's an email to us. And yes, some more volunteers would be useful, or else we may have to introduce conscription. That's a joke, Joyce. And what we found is that we sort of let people find their own area of interest as to what they do when they're here. And like the magazine guys found their own area of interest. Andrew Moore, who's going through the collection of Graham Howard, Andrew wrote the book on Warwick Farm. Graham Howard was a motor horse historian for many, many years, a race commentator at Warwick Farm, and he was a journalist, so he left behind a huge archive of material. So Andrew's going through and making sense of that, which that's the job that he sort of naturally fell into, and so on. Rod is doing results. Rod Shivers is looking after race results. because prior to the computerised NatSoft system, of course, all of this was paper-based. So we're getting results from the earliest race meetings, and Brian Goulding is looking after race programs. So yeah, the guys have sort of found, volunteers have sort of found their own area of interest, and which then means they're self-starting and set their own agenda and can organise it as they see fit.
So if you want to volunteer and provide some help, please go to motorheritage.org.au and you can register your interest there. You can also become a supporter of the foundation and help with some of the costs of the work that these guys are doing, because this isn't, it does cost money to be able to look after books and pieces. Peter, thanks for your time. It's good to catch up again.
Yes, it was.
And I'll call you head curator from now on.
And stand to attention and salute.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It was great to catch up with Peter and talk about the foundation one last time this year. If you would like to volunteer to help the foundation with their curation of the content they have, head over to motorheritage.org.au/volunteer and register your interest. There is always a lot to do. Before I finish, a quick programming note. During the first week of January, I'll be publishing an interview with a young rally driver, Taylor Gill, who has already achieved success in Europe and the Junior World Rally Championship, being runner-up this year. Not bad for a lad from Lake Macquarie, Newcastle area. And look out for the podcast and get behind Taylor as he goes back to challenge for wins as he steps up a class in 2026. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to your favourite player, whether it is Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Samsung or YouTube. Get the episodes delivered as they're published. And you can also subscribe to the website, motoringweekly.com.au. You'll also get notified when a new episode is uploaded, and you can listen to all of them there if you don't use a podcast app. We also have the podcast delivered through Mixcloud, which, like Spotify, was originally designed for music and now hosts radio programs and podcasts. If you like classic rock music, then once you've listened to Motoring Weekly, find White Rabbit Radio, which is our sister radio program. We do classic cars and classic rock. I'm Stephen Wells, and you've listened to Motoring Weekly, the podcast for the Australian historic road and racing community.